What's going on YouTube? It's TH back again with another video, and today we are ranking all the NFL head coaches from the worst to the best into the 2023-2024 NFL season. Excited to bring this video your way. This was a pretty tough one to do because I like a lot of these guys, and it feels like there's a lot of good head coaches out there. And realistically, turnover, you tend to have 4 or 5 guys lose a job, but that means for the most part, there's 28, 27 guys that are pretty safe and doing a pretty good job leading their organization, at least in regards to where that organization is at. Long tangent aside, let me hear your list down below, because I know my list is not the right list. Let me see yours down below. Who would move up? Who would move down? Who's your favorite team, and where do you think their head coach should slot in at? Love to hear your thoughts and rationale down below in the comment section. If you enjoy, hit that like button. If you're new around here, hit that subscribe button. All that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. Jonathan Gannon at 32. I know he's kind of catching some flack because some of the clips, from Cardinals training camp haven't been like super inspiring about him as a leader. We just don't know yet, and he was the head coaching hire that I gave the lowest grade to. Not that it wasn't a positive grade, not that I wasn't intrigued about where it goes. Ultimately, there's not much worse that could have been done for Arizona compared to Cliff Kingsbury and the Steve Keim era. They needed a fresh start. Monty Ossenforth, love what he did in the offseason, and he's the guy who brought in Jonathan Gannon, so I have no reason to doubt this. He's just the coach I have the least amount of confidence in, and also the least amount to pull from, really. Because also, in Philadelphia, 1 to 2 years as a standout DC. Okay, compared to other guys that are even new hires or getting a second chance at being a head coach, I got more to pull from. Shane Steichen comes in at 31, kind of the same deal. I just don't know, And I had Anthony Richardson at QB 30. It's not because I don't think Anthony Richardson's going to be a great quarterback. I just think it's going to be rough year one, and naturally so. It is that way for a lot of rookie quarterbacks, and it's that way for a lot of first-year head coaches and first-time head coaches. So Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, they are the two guys that are first-time head coaches of these new head coaching hires other than DeMeco Ryans. I have Ryans way higher because I feel so much more confident about him as a leader. We'll come to that once we get to 25. Steichen, Gannon, I just don't know what that's going to be. And ultimately, I look at what Philadelphia did with Jalen Hurts his rookie year. He only plays 4 games, and there's Carson Wentz there who was bad, but they won 4 games. And then Nick Sirianni, they kind of get to the playoffs, but they're kind of limping in. It's mostly a run-heavy attack on offense, and then they lose in the first round. But ultimately, it was slow, steady progress in the right direction. I think it's going to be the same thing here for the Colts with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. It'd be rough year one, but you're going to be picking top 5. Maybe you land an Olu Fashanu, a Joe Alt, maybe if you're lucky, a Marvin Harrison Jr. And then we get to see in year 2 progress. Maybe you get to that 7-8 win mark, and then the year after that, you become a playoff competitive team in a division that could be wide open by then. We'll see ultimately what happens with all the rookie quarterbacks really in that division. A lot of things that we just don't know yet. And I don't know what Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon look like as head coaches, so they come in at the bottom. Josh McDaniels, he's got a lot of records as a head coach you don't want, like most double-digit point blown leads. And longest stretches without a win. It's insane. And considering he once had the Denver Broncos as the last undefeated team, I think, in the NFL that one year, his first year in Denver, man, it's been a hard downhill slope ever since then. And ultimately, his track record as a head coach just is not very good, both between Denver and Las Vegas. Maybe it changes this year. I think that defense is going to be abysmal, so I think it's going to be another 5, 6, maybe a 7-win season. And if Jimmy Garoppolo misses time, that record could be even worse. Then we get Ron Rivera at 29. Look, Ron Rivera's a great guy, and awesome story that he battled back from cancer and got to be a head coach. But ultimately, if we're just being honest, I think he's the new Jeff Fisher. If you're afraid of going anything worse than 7 and 10, you hire Ron Rivera, understanding you're probably not going to do anything better than 10 and 7. That's going to be the soft, landing area for your record. He is a high character guy. I don't doubt that. I live in Virginia. I hear a lot of people speak very highly about the man that is Ron Rivera. But as a head coach, I don't know. And as the director of player operation the last couple of years, that's even been more spotty. But we're focused on him as a head coach, and ultimately, I think he's kind of Jeff Fisher. If you want to live somewhere there in the middle of the NFL, you want to live in no man's land, which is the worst place you could find yourself, Ron Rivera's your guy. Todd Bowles at 28. I think Bowles ultimately coaches a better defense, and that's kind of why I gave him the nudge here over Ron Rivera. Also, Todd Bowles, actually, you compare what the Jets looked like pre and post Todd Bowles era, he actually had some better years than a lot of other people did. And maybe a change here at OC. Maybe he can kind of turn things around in Tampa. I doubt it, but he does at least coach a more consistent and more top-end defense than I think Ron Rivera does. So I do want to give him that. And, just two guys that I think are at least Ron Rivera, it's like he's Jeff Fisher. Todd Bowles, at least I can give him the note of like him as a defensive play caller is actually really special. Will he get you to 7-10? Maybe not, but at least I'd enjoy him being my defensive play caller, and I can feel optimistic about what that means for my team. So that's why he gets the bump over Rivera. Matt Eberflus, I just have a little less on him than I do with these other guys, so I'm a little more optimistic. Liked him as a DC in Indianapolis. I think the scheme is a pretty good one. I think they got the personnel minus defensive line depth and talent overall to be able to make it work. And I just don't know really what he is, so this is going to be a big year for him. I do like the hires that he's made as for both coordinators. I'm excited to see what Luke Getsy can do with that offense, so that's going to be a big indicator. It's going to be a huge season to determine if Matt Eberflus is going to be like QB or head coach 31 or 30 next year, or if he's going to be in the teens perhaps. Maybe Chicago overperforms. Yeah, Eberflus right now. And also, I got to say, like, that's a little hyperbolic for me to say he's going to shoot up that much, because I don't think the Bears are looking to win this year, honestly. There's still too much holes on the defensive line to where maybe they get to 7-10, but then one more offseason away from maybe taking the NFC North for their own. So I do think Eberflus has a little bit longer of a leash than some of their guys, maybe in around this range. Dennis Allen at 26. He's fine. Not a great, start to his career as the Oakland Raiders head coach then. But, I think he's been fine in New Orleans. Obviously, QB play wasn't, incredible. Andy Dalton was fine. He's pretty good. He had a little nice little last hoorah in New Orleans last year, but, nothing too special. And I don't know if he's one of those head coaches. Again, kind of like Todd Bowles. Yeah, he calls good defense, and I like that. But I don't know if he's doing much else from a character or leadership standpoint to elevate the rest of the defense, like some of the guys, or just the team in general, like some of the guys towards the top of this list. Then DeMeco Ryals comes in at 25 because, look, he's been a great defensive coach, and I have no reason to think that that's going to change once he gets to Houston, even with inferior talent than what he had in San Fran. But he's also just such a high character guy. I think the world of him as a leader. Now, maybe I'm reaching because I'm not the guy in the locker room, but from what I can see and what I can tell on how motivated his players are in San Francisco, I think that's going to translate in Houston. And also think he's a perfect culture fit, former Texan player. I think that was the perfect hire for Houston. I think it's a great place for him to go, turn around a franchise, and legitimately cement himself as one of the best up-and-coming young head coaches. So I know he is less, head coaching games than Dennis Allen, Matt Eberflus, Todd Bowles, a whole lot less than Ron Rivera. I just find him that much as a leader, on top of knowing I know that defense is going to be pretty darn well coached. It may not be great because there's still some talent gaps on that side of the ball, but they'll be well coached by DeMeco Ryans. On to the next set of names, Mike McCarthy. It's just been up and down. Yeah, he's got the ring, but also kind of an ugly end to his tenure in Green Bay. And this could be a huge year for him in Dallas. If he's taken over as the play caller, no more excuses, no more finger pointing. You can't say it's Kellen Moore. You can't say it's that. It's time to pony up. So he has the opportunity to shoot up this list, but I think, a lot of his shortcomings are still there as a head coach. I don't know if he's going to make the ultimate difference when it comes to a play calling standpoint, and despite saying he's embracing analytics, I don't know if that always comes into his game management and clock management. So we'll see. Maybe all that changes this upcoming season, but still, I think Mike McCarthy, meh. Brandon Staley, this is a team that's had a decent record, made the playoffs last year. I think despite Brandon Staley, to be honest with you, his first year where he was always going for 2-point conversions, trying to push the league forward in regards to fourth down decisions, I loved it. I loved how hyper aggressive he was, and ultimately he was leaning into the numbers. And then in year two, he just got overly cautious and totally broke away from that. And people with no spine like that, I have a hard. As much as I was excited about the Brandon Staley hire, and I thought he was a great person to go to LA. When you go back and forth and kind of flip-flop like that, I have a hard time buying into you. So even if Brandon Staley does revert back and become more aggressive, I probably will be a little slow to buy in, because if you're just going to go whichever way the wind blows, I don't know what you actually are as a leader, as a head coach, and as an individual. So I want to be higher on Brandon Staley, but right now he's kind of working against me. And all the stuff I was excited about, the defense hasn't been great. He lost the hyper-aggressive, kind of mindset. So what is it that I like about Brandon Staley right now? I'm not entirely sure what that is. Arthur Smith at 22. Look, he's turned that offense into the best rushing attack in the NFL, maybe. The only team in the NFL last year that ran the ball more than they threw the ball. And I think you could see the same thing this year by adding in Bijan Robinson and, it's year two Desmond Ridder. If you saw my QB rankings, I'm not overly optimistic about what that looks like this season. And I think he deserves a little more credit than myself and a lot of other people give him. But I do worry that if the Falcons go 5-12, 6-11, that they ultimately do decide to move on, because the record's not great. But I do think he's kind of building a team perfectly in his image. And this is an Atlanta team where if Arthur Smith had Ryan Tannehill, I think I might pick them to win the NFC South. It'd be close between them and New Orleans, but I already got it pretty close, and that's with Desmond Ridder, and I'm not excited about Desmond Ridder this year. I don't think he has that year two breakout. So if you give this team Ryan Tannehill, Arthur Smith might have the year that I think Falcon fans are anticipating Desmond Ridder has, and in turn, Arthur Smith kind of gets this team to the playoffs and shoots up this ranking. But we'll see. I just don't think Ridder takes that step forward. But what Arthur Smith does well, he does it really, really, really well. So we're going to get to see what that all kind of comes together and looks like this year in Atlanta. Zach Taylor, 21. Maybe this is a hot take because I know the Bengals are, hey, they're my pick to win the Super Bowl. I don't think Zach Taylor is the reason why, right? I think it's those receivers. I think it's Joe Burrow. And I will give Zach Taylor something. This is the one thing I can give him credit for. Midway through Joe Burrow's second year, he turned the keys over to Joe Burrow. They went from this team that was not letting him throw the ball more than 20 times a game to like week 10 on, he was only throwing the ball 20 plus times a game, and he was the reason they were winning games, him and Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. So I appreciate his ability to say, hey, what I'm doing isn't working. We need to change. Let's give the keys to the offense to the face of the franchise. And ultimately that's been the best decision he's made throughout his head coaching tenure in Cincy. That and then bringing in Lou Anarumo. That's probably number 2 because I think he gets a head coaching job next coaching carousel. And I've said this a couple times on the channel. I think before every Bengals game, you're going to hear every talking head, whether it's Fox, CBS, ESPN, whoever, they're going to say, yeah, that offense is great. Burrow, Chase, the receivers are fantastic. But Lou Anarumo is really the unsung hero of this team. You're going to hear that a ton this season. And not, the credit going away from Zach Taylor and instead go to Lou Anarumo. So, I don't think he's a bad coach, and I appreciate his ability to shift and adjust, kind of like another guy we'll talk about later on, Nick Sirianni. But I just don't see Zach Taylor as the reason why the Bengals are winning football games. So he's got to come in a little bit lower than I think a lot of people would expect. Kevin Stefanski at 20. I actually really like Kevin Stefanski as a play caller, but the last couple seasons have been tough. And when you go from 11-5 to 8-9 to 7-10, and your record continuously is moving in the wrong direction, that's not a good sign. And despite being a good OC and a good play caller and a good offensive mind in general, you might be on the hot seat because, if Deshaun Watson is a disappointment and they go 7-10 again, I have a hard time thinking Stefanski keeps that job because the Browns' thinking then is going to be, holy cow, we've poured so much into Deshaun Watson. We've got to find a coach that can make it work. A la Sean Payton in the Denver Broncos this offseason. I could totally see Cleveland being in the same boat next year if Watson severely underperforms. So I like Stefanski, but I like that a lot from a play calling standpoint. The head coaching returns have been working in the wrong direction. Kevin O'Connell, only a second-year head coach. I think he did a lot with that Minnesota offense that I really did enjoy. So I'm optimistic about him going into year 2, and maybe he could be even higher on this list. I do think there are some shortcomings that might hold him back, like the talent on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully Brian Flores is able to mask that. And I am optimistic and excited about seeing Kevin O'Connell be the first guy that Kirk Cousins is at in Minnesota as a second-year play caller. This is the first time that Kirk Cousins has been able to work with the same guy 2 years in a row as the main play caller. So maybe that makes Minnesota that much more legit. Maybe it proves that Kevin O'Connell is that legit. But right now I'm kind of playing it safe, keeping him right here in the middle of the pack just because I only got 1 year of sample size. Same thing kind of with Mike McDaniel. I think the offensive scheme is fantastic. Did feel like defense has started to figure him out a little bit towards the end of the year. So what's that counter? What's that adjustment look like this year? That's going to be a huge factor. If he has that counter and forces defenses to kind of play it back to where they were first 8 weeks of last year, the offense stays super explosive and it becomes one of the best offenses in the league. He's shooting up this ranking. I also think it helps having Vic Fangio. Basically, Mike McDaniel's going to focus on the offense. Vic Fangio's going to focus on the defense. It's going to be that simple in Miami. And I think that ultimately plays to the strength of the Dolphins. So a guy who could easily shoot up this list. I got to see it for a second year. Robert Saleh going into year 3, and it's kind of funny. Both guys on the screen, DeMeco Ryans, Robert Saleh, former 49ers DCs, and 2 guys I would absolutely run away from if a bar fight were to break out. 2 massive human beings. So I don't know, random coincidence there. But I think this is the year, right? If the Jets disappoint, they are the Denver Broncos of last year, right? They get the big name quarterback, but they don't hit the standards they want. His seat's hot, but I think he does a great job coaching up that defense. It was maybe the best defense in football last year. Robert Saleh deserves a lot of that credit on top of what they've done, building up that defensive line, having Quinton Williams have a breakout season. The cornerback duo of DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, for my money, the best corner tandem in the league last year. Not saying it's going to be the same thing this year, but last year, I think those were the 2 guys that paired up for the best collective play, and Robert Saleh deserves that credit. And the scheme is great, too. I mean, it worked in San Francisco, it's worked in New York, and I think he's a good leader. But if it doesn't come together this year, it's going to be the appearance that he couldn't lead a squad to the expectations that have been set for the New York Jets this year. So could be a potentially hot seat, but I like Robert Saleh a ton. And ultimately, if the Jets live up to their standards, he's shooting up this list a good bit. On to the top half of these rankings, Frank Reich, I liked him a lot in Indianapolis. You do have to point out that he was one of the people who ultimately is making the decision to bring in a Carson Wentz, bring in a Phillip Rivers, roll with a Jacoby Brissett. He was part of why they kept bargain shopping at the most important position in the NFL, and ultimately, that's why he kind of lost that job. I mean, you can only do that for so long. I do think Carolina's a great place for him to go. Obviously, a former Carolina Panther in his own right. I'm really excited to see what he does with Josh McCown and Jim Caldwell in the same building, working with a Bryce Young. That makes me even more excited about Bryce Young and his long-term prospects. I think Frank Reich's a good coach. There's just a few player personnel things that didn't work in Indianapolis, and I'm hoping he learned from those lessons. Both, like, now they've clearly made an investment as a long-term quarterback and Bryce Young. So we've already moved on from the bargain shopping thing, but Indianapolis year over year was like, they could use another wide receiver. They need a stud. And that's kind of how I feel about Carolina. So I don't know if that's his voice kind of leading this team in that direction, saying, I can make do with middle-of-the-road guys. I can get them open. And I hope that's not the case, because that much hubris can definitely get in the way of a lot of progress. So we'll see what it all comes together, and ultimately it'll be another offseason before I get an answer to that question. But I do like Frank Reich as a head coach. Glad he got another opportunity. I think Carolina's a good place for him to be at. Dan Campbell at 15. I mean, this guy is a great leader. I mean, there is no doubt that the Lions players love playing for Dan Campbell, and I have no doubt about that. And ultimately, the whole rah-rah of it kind of works in his favor. I don't know if he's doing a whole lot from a standpoint of, like, X's and O's, but he hired Ben Johnson. You got to get him the win for that. That's a huge W. And Aaron Glenn, yes, it was a little rocky last year, and I've been kind of ahead of the curve. Each of the last 2 years, I've said he's a dark horse head coaching candidate, because I think he's another guy that I think players would love to play for, former NFL player himself. And but we saw the second half last year where his patience with Aaron Glenn paid off. That team got to a middle-of-the-road-ish defense, and the turnover margin kind of had positive regression towards the mean. Aiden Hutchinson turned it on. Some work this offseason with Brad Holmes, patching up that secondary, raising the floor there. I think Aaron Glenn's going to, in turn, look like a pretty solid DC this year, and you got to give Dan Campbell the credit for making that hire. So it's much more so from a leadership standpoint and kind of a CEO leading this team in a positive direction. That's what Dan Campbell's done right, versus like Kyle Shanahan, it's a scheme. But nonetheless, you still got to give Dan Campbell his flowers. He's done a great job in just the 2 years he's had so far. Matt LaFleur, I know Green Bay is coming off a disappointing season, but he had 3 consecutive 13-win seasons before that. There are not bad head coaches doing that year in and year out. And even like where I'm saying Zach Taylor isn't like the reason why I think the Packers or the Bengals are winning games, I feel much more confident that Matt LaFleur is part of the reason Rodgers won back-to-back MVPs, and part of the reason the Packers did have 3 consecutive 13-win seasons. I absolutely think Matt LaFleur is a part of the mix there, much more so than Zach Taylor in Cincinnati. So love what he does schematically. I think he actually gets a lot of respect from his players. Now, part of that is you win games. Things kind of work in your general direction. Winning cures all. So this year, if it's rocky with Jordan Love, what does that mean? What does the locker room do to him? That's going to be fascinating to see. And ultimately, what does he do with Jordan Love? That's going to be a huge indicator whether he stays where he is, moves up, or moves down. Sean Payton then at 13. Look, I think the expectation that he's going to turn around the Broncos, and if you're anticipating the Broncos getting to the playoffs, you're saying because Sean Payton fixes everything Nathaniel Hackett does wrong. I think it's a little foolish. Is he a good head coach? Yes. Does he have a Super Bowl ring? Yes. But after that Super Bowl ring, there was a lot of disappointing seasons in New Orleans. And they, year over year, perpetually had one of the best rosters in the NFL. Like annually towards the top 5 of roster rankings. And they maxed out the credit card, right? Like they expended draft assets to keep it that way. And ultimately they got to the Super Bowl one time. I'm not saying you should hold that against Sean Payton, but I think if you're, again, setting yourself up to say the Broncos are going to make the playoffs, you might be setting yourself up for some disappointment this year, because I don't know if Sean Payton's going to be the guy that ultimately makes all the world of difference. Do want to give him his flowers. He's been a good offensive mind, and he's been a good head coach, got a lot of wins, done a lot of good stuff with Drew Brees and even quarterbacks before that. I don't know if he's going to be able to turn around Russell Wilson, though. We might be past the Rubicon there, past the point of return, and trying to turn around Russell Wilson in his career. Pete Carroll comes in at 12. I mean, he's just the ultimate player's coach. I mean, another guy that I don't know if his football schematics are bringing a whole lot to the table. His cover 3, during the Legion of Boom, that was his bread and butter at USC, and that definitely was a huge calling card for a direction the NFL went in for half a decade to a decade. Give him credit there, but nowadays I don't think that's really the case, and that's why they've made some changes on the DC side of the last 3 years. And I don't think you look at his schematic, quote-unquote brilliance and think that's why Pete Carroll is still a head coach despite his age and despite maybe a couple of tough seasons there in Seattle. But he's just the ultimate player's coach, like I said. Guys love playing for him, and he does enough to kind of keep that team consistently competitive. And he buys into his players, and they buy into him. I mean, Geno Smith's the ultimate example of that. And also a guy that they haven't been the most flashy hires of OCDCs, but for the most part, he's kind of been on the right track record there. I think he's actually a really good CEO of a team, leading and hiring the right people. And because of that, you got to give Pete Carroll his credit. And obviously, he's had a whole lot of success in his career. So it's tough making this list. How much of this is me saying this is the head coach I'd want? If I'm comparing, Pete Carroll versus Sean Payton, I'd want to have Pete Carroll as my head coach this year. versus also like taking into account that what have they done in the past? You know, how much of that track record am I putting into the rankings here? And that kind of makes it tough to evaluate. But ultimately, you know, Pete Carroll, I do think a lot of his success in years past will be true this year versus, you know, I think a lot of Sean Payton's success over the last, you know, over his career in New Orleans has a lot of player dependency. He does a lot of things right, and then now things are very different in Denver. So I don't know. Long tangent aside, let's move on to Brian Daboll here at 11. I know 1 year of head coaching resume, but he did wonders for that team. And just the fact the Giants made the playoffs is by far and away more than I could have ever expected Brian Daboll would do in his first year as a head coach. Plus, Mike Kafka, I think, could be in the head coaching carousel, getting head coaching interviews next year. Bringing in Wink Martindale is an inspired move for a guy that has a deep offensive background, can work with Mike Kafka, develop him as an OC, let Wink Martindale run that defense. And Wink Martindale had head coaching interviews with the Giants, let alone DC interviews, right? Like, that was such an important move, and I love that he was able to do that. So from a hiring standpoint, team expectations, he far exceeded those last year, all telling me that, yeah, this guy's got the right thinking, and he's definitely kind of taking after, you know, Sean McDermott, who obviously was his head coach in Buffalo, and it feels very similar to Joe Schoen and Brandon Beane. Obviously, is like an understudy to Beane in Buffalo. So love what Schoen, love what Daboll are kind of doing for the direction of the Giants, and he maximized Daniel Jones last year. Need I say more? Like, that was not something I thought was possible. So you got to give a ton of credit there to Brian Daboll. Mike Vrabel here at 10. This is another guy who just maximized the talent of the roster. Great leader, and the fact that the Titans 2 years ago were 12-5, the number one seed in the AFC, while also setting an NFL record for most players to be on the active roster throughout a season is just remarkable. Those two things should not ever, ever, ever be said in the same sentence. Mike Vrabel made it possible. So got to give him his flowers. I don't know if the Titans are going to be an insane team, but I also know he's not going to get fired even if they go 3-14. You know, he's earned so much credit, and he's earned so much leeway to where it's like, if Tennessee's bad this year, it's not Mike Vrabel's fault. It's the roster. They don't have the pieces. They're kind of in a competitive rebuild. Maybe those moves to stay competitive didn't work, but keep with Vrabel and continue to build upon what strengths are already there, and then eventually they'll get back on track. Mike Vrabel, I think, has already earned a lot of respect, and it's almost kind of poor man's Mike Tomlin in a lot of ways, just because he maximizes what is there despite how good or how bad it might be. Doug Peterson at 9. I mean, just what he did with the Jags last year after the disaster that was Urban Meyer. You got to give him credit there. And midway through last year, his offense started to click. Trevor Lawrence, you had the light bulb moment where it all flashed and it all kind of came together. And even before that, won a Super Bowl. All of Carson Wentz's best years were with Doug Peterson, right? And even before that, obviously, working with Andy Reid, who obviously is going to be in the picture for the next screen. A little spoiler alert there for who number one is. But yeah, he's just one of the best in the league. And last year solidified that by going to a new team, doing it in a different environment, and fixing Trevor Lawrence really after Urban Meyer really stunted, potentially could have ruined what maybe could be the best quarterback. Like, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but if Trevor Lawrence in 5 years' time is kind of battling Mahomes for that top quarterback spot in the league, I don't think it's going to shock people. And Urban Meyer almost cost us that, right? Like, if Urban Meyer came back for a second year, there's a potential that, you know, there's an alternate history that plays out very, very different. Doug Peterson, luckily enough, kind of prevented us from going down that path. Let's move on to the top 8 now. Nick Sirianni at 8. Yeah, and kind of like what I said earlier about Zach Taylor, I love a guy who can pivot, and that's the one thing I can give Zach Taylor. Nick Sirianni did that in year 1. I think it was week 9. They had a Thursday night loss to Tampa Bay, and they basically just trusted Jalen Hurts too much as a passer, pivoted, tapped into the run game, used Jalen Hurts as a rusher, and ultimately that bought him time to grow as a passer. It still made him viable, still made them a good team, built a culture of winning, and then that set up Jalen Hurts where another offseason, go into year 3, and that growth as a passer ultimately all came together, and they were the best team in the NFC last year and made it to the Super Bowl. And I just love Sirianni, his balance of being a good offensive mind, but also hiring decisions. I think basically new coordinators, I don't think anything's going to be really lost there. And he's a player's guy. Like, I mean, players love playing for him. He's so pumped up. He's so animated on this sideline, and it exudes energy that the players build off of. So, yes, not a guy with a whole expansive resume. Hasn't been doing it for 2 decades or anything like that, but what we've seen so far out of Nick Sirianni has been awesome to watch. Sean McVay, still got him here at 7. The Rams ultimately still might be picking number 1 overall next year. I think the Rams could be terrible this year. They're kind of an injury or 2 away from doing that. If Cooper Kupp misses time and they trade Aaron Donald, this team easily could be picking number 1 overall, but I don't think it's because of Sean McVay. He's a great offensive mind, and I actually think guys like playing for him. And he's got this great balance of, like, I'm going to push you when I need to push you, but I'm also, hey, man, you're an adult, you're a professional, I don't need to be on your ass all the time. Like, I'm going to trust you to do your thing, you're going to trust me to do mine, and I love that balance that he has, and he toes that line, which is really hard. It's a very fine line to walk, but I think he toes that balance perfectly. And ultimately, if this team does get the number 1 pick and Caleb Williams, then Sean McVay's sticking around, and I want to see Sean McVay and Caleb Williams. And that's the turn, like, even though the Rams are bad, but I want to see what happens next because they got Sean McVay there. That's what tells me he's a great coach. I think he could be better in regards to, like, time management, clock management, but everything else, I think he does really, really well. And it's also, he's just awesome to watch in the preseason, like, on the call, like, joining the broadcast booth, and he's like, nope, there's a hold on that big play, it's coming back. And if he does go the route of TV, he's going to be killer. He's going to be a great color commentator. Bill Belichick at 6. A lot of this is borrowed trust for what he's done in this past. I mean, probably the greatest head coach in NFL history, but he's still a great defensive mind. And I think he does it in a different way than Nick Sirianni. He's not hype and, exuding hella energy on the sideline. He's almost more so a guy you're scared of, and because of that, he commands a lot of respect, but he is still a good leader. Maybe questionable in regards to his, player personnel management, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about him as a head coach, and I think even if you're like Tom Brady is the engineer of that success, Brady wouldn't have had as many rings if not for Bill Belichick. It's very much a symbiotic relationship. Just like Bill Belichick might not have a ring without Brady. I do think Brady was more so the determining factor for that success, but they needed one another. That's just like Walsh in Montana. If Walsh is a different quarterback, yes, it worked with Steve Young, but if he doesn't have those two Hall of Famers, there's no guarantee that works. And in turn, Montana might not be an all-time great if not for Bill Walsh. So I think the same is true here, long story short, about Belichick and Brady. Yeah, it's a little tougher without Brady there, but I still think what he does defensively, what he does from a leadership standpoint, and just the borrowed trust and the career resume puts him somewhere here in the top 8, and I got him at 6. Kyle Shanahan comes in at 5. Don't love what he does as a clock management guy. Like, I think he burns a lot of timeouts because plays don't get in. So I'm interested to see how Brock Purdy handles that, because that still happened with Jimmy Garoppolo, who he could trust run that offense. And that was really the only reason they kept bringing back Jimmy G. He could run Kyle Shanahan's offense. He could find the number one target, and more often than not, that guy's open, so he'll make the throw. So what does it look like with a guy who has started 7 games in his career, 8 games in his career? It's going to be interesting to see, or a first-year guy in San Francisco and Sam Darnold, that's not going to be as easy as it was for Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe. But what he does schematically is just leaps and bounds beyond everyone else, other than Andy Reid. Those are the only guys, him, Andy Reid, and Sean McVay. Those are the 3 offensive minds. Mike McDaniel, maybe in another year's time, we'll add him into the mix. Those are the guys that you look at and you're like, what they do offensively, even where their shortcomings are, the pros outweigh the cons, and it's not even close. Shanahan is, to me, the best play caller in the league. Andy Reid is definitely up there, but to me, I think Shanahan does a little bit more with less than what Reid has. So that's ultimately the bias that makes me lean in that direction. But I'd be happy with either one of them being the head coach of the Steelers moving forward if Mike Tomlin just randomly retired. Anyways, I'm going down on a random tangent again. Shanahan, don't have to deliberate on this one too much longer. The best offensive mind, if not the best, he's top 2 or 3. Sean McDermott, a guy that I love. Like I said earlier, Brandon Beane's my favorite GM in the league. He does everything so shrewd, so smart, and he's not trying to blow everyone's mind, make a huge move. He just does smart things after, one smart move after another, and the process is so sound. And I feel a lot of the same ways about Sean McDermott. He's a good defensive mind, and he coaches that side of the ball well, but he's also solid when the clock management, and he just doesn't do anything to lose games for the Bills. And he never overreacts. He's never, overreacting to anything. Like, he's just a solid, stable, consistent leader, and I love that about him, on top of what you get with him being a good defensive mind. So love Sean McDermott. Yes, maybe you could flip these 2 guys, Shanahan and McDermott, but really it comes down to, I think McDermott does a little bit more non-schematic stuff that I like, versus Shanahan, and his offensive scheme is just, it's, like I said, one of the best in the league. John Harbaugh at 3. Him and Tomlin, I'll talk about them at the same time because they come from the same division and hired around the same time, and so many comparisons have been made about these 2 guys. These 2 guys, more than anybody else, I think, maximize whatever talent's on their roster, and it's ridiculous. Like, the Ravens, there are so many games where they stay competitive when they're playing, third-string quarterbacks like Anthony Brown, and they're on to, like, corner number 4, their preseason depth chart. And he still has this team competitive because they're always prepared and they're always fired up. And I think ultimately the hiring decisions, right? Like, Wink Martindale was a good hire. Greg Roman allowed them to kind of build an offense. But he also understands good will not get us as far as great will. So let's make a change. Let's bring in a Mike McDonald for the defensive coordinator spot. Let's bring in a Todd Monken at OC. And on top of that, what he does with Eric DeCosta, the GM, from a player personnel standpoint, is so sharp. Again, another one of these guys that not every move needs to wow you. It's good process. It's smart. And it ultimately built up over time to make such a steady, sound organization. I also think guys really respect him. And there's no doubt about that for Mike Tomlin. Like, guys love playing for Mike Tomlin. And year over year, I mean, just the fact that he has had, 16 consecutive non-losing seasons. That's a record that, for a guy that did that once, going 8-8 with Duck Hodges. Are you kidding me? He has done so much with so little sometimes, and also has gone to Super Bowls, has won Super Bowls. So he's done it at varying levels, maximizing what little might be there, as well as maximizing how much great is there. Sure, there's a couple seasons where, like, the killer bees, you wish the Steelers could have gone further, but all in all, Mike Tomlin, the amount of respect he commands across the league is there for a reason. He's just fantastic at taking what's there and taking it to its full potential. And then Andy Reid comes in at 1 because he's a great offensive mind. He's a great leader, commands so much respect. I don't think this shocks anybody. Also, he's the head coach of the reigning Super Bowl champs, so all that makes sense. He's won two Super Bowls the last 3 years. Year over year, had the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship game. He's just got a great, proven track record of success. The process is always sound. He's a great offensive mind and has developed some of the best quarterbacks in their given era because of that. Knows how to get guys open, again, going back to the scheme. Good hires, too, like a Spagnuolo as a DC kind of is an inspired move, especially with handful of years of hindsight. That ended up being one of the best hirings that he could have made, and it's brought so much stability to that side of the ball. You name it, Andy Reid does it at a pretty high level, so he's got to come in at number 1. Let me hear what you guys think down below in the comment section. Apologies for a few, long-winded tangents, head coaching, and the team building process. Sometimes I get a little carried away, but let me hear your list down below in the comment section. Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Who's your favorite team? And ultimately, where do you think their head coach should fit in the mix? I would love to hear your thoughts and your rationale for all that down below in the comment section. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and want to see more football content like this. But until next time, my name is Tej, and I am signing off.